Okay, so let's take a look at transactional replication. Transactional replication is different from snapshot replication in that it's catching things that are changing throughout the day and then moving those over to the other server on some time interval. Now, when you set up transactional replication, it's very similar to snapshot replication where you give it tables or columns or subsets of tables that you want to move. You can say of these 1,000 tables, give me of these 1,000 tables, I want to only replicate 3 of those tables. But if one of those 3 tables has a really fat column that we don't need on the other side, like a varchar max or something like that, we could say, let's just skip that last column that's not needed and take that out of the replication. So it's only going to synchronize part of a table if that's what you choose at that point. The other thing with the different replication types is you can usually specify a where clause. So if you have these 3 tables that you're synchronizing, you've already skipped one column like I just talked about, and let's say you don't want to transfer any archive data that's no longer valid, that may be older than 2 years or something like that. You can put in, it's similar to a where clause, but you put in a filter so it will filter what's being sent across there. So if let's say you have a table with 10 million rows, but only 500,000 of those rows are new or relevant, you could put in a filter there that says copy only those new rows. With transactional replication, you have a log reader, and the way it works is it scans the SQL Server log files, the database log files, so that it can figure out what transactions need to be moved to the other side. Now, that's an important factor here, and how that works is that in snapshot replication, it doesn't need to do that. It just pulls a copy of the data on a specific time interval. With transactional replication, there's a log reader there, and what it's doing is it's scanning your SQL Server logs, figuring out which things need to be caught and moved over to the subscribers, and then it's scripting that out in a way that those can be then transported and then applied or replayed on the subscriber end. With transactional replication, you can control the interval of how often that happens. You may need to have that happen once a minute, or you may need to have it happen once an hour, or it could even be once a day. If you went that long, it would be very similar to snapshot replication because it would be just as stale. But with how often that data gets moved is an important factor in understanding what you're using that subscriber database for. If it's something like you need to know how many are in stock right now to determine if we have to reorder something, for instance, that might be something that transactional replication is used for, and it's set to a very small increment, like maybe every 1 minute it catches what's there and it synchronizes it over to the other side, from the publisher to the distributor and then to the subscriber. Transactional replication, I see a lot of people use this for sort of a warehousing type of, or a reporting type environment. We had one client we worked with where they were running a bunch of reports, and every morning their entire production system bogged down because all these management team people were running reports against that production database and locking it up and making it so that the actual systems that were doing product and sales and movement and all that couldn't hit that database. So what we ended up doing for that client was we set up transactional replication to take a specific set of tables that were needed for reports. We synchronized them through transactional replication from the publisher, or the main database where we were having all the contention on, and copied it over to a secondary reporting database. And that way we offloaded all of these big reports that were being run that were really slow, and made it so that we could tune that other database optimally for the reporting. So we'd tune the subscriber optimally for the reporting, while the publisher only was being used for the production use of what was being used. So people running those reports, bogging the system down every single day, using transactional replication, we were able to give them a copy of that data that reports could be run against. There was one client I worked with years ago where they did a very similar thing, but it was for customer reports rather than internal reports, where their main primary system had a lot of load on it, and when people ran these long reporting queries, it got to a point that those long reporting queries prevented certain things from going into that database. We used transactional replication there. The data was synchronized off to a second database, and that second database was okay to have a little bit of blocking in it because it was just for reporting, and those blocks were not preventing any of the actual transactions from coming into the primary database. A lot of different use cases out there for transactional replication, but really the key around most of the transactional replication use cases is that you have data that's being pushed in one direction and that it needs to happen frequently. For instance, so from one source out to one or more servers, but it's not coming back to those servers, it's just going out. It has to happen more frequently than you'd be able to achieve with snapshot replication. And with transactional replication, you usually set it to keep it fairly up to date within a few minutes. If you had a small enough data set, and if it was something you could say that snapshot replication, that you could resynchronize it every 2 or 3 minutes, usually not feasible with snapshot, but theoretically if you did, the effect would be similar to transactional replication, but the difference is when snapshot replication is being reinitialized, there's a small window where the data is unavailable because it's being replaced, whereas with transactional replication, that's usually only a small window in the beginning of starting to synchronize that data, and once that data is being synchronized, it's just putting it in row by row into the subscribers at that point. It's a great way to go from a central location out to many different locations, going with no data coming back to that center location.